All right, so that transition was reasonably smooth. Great to have both of you here. Thank you for joining us. And this is one of my first in-person experiences in a while, and we were deciding whether to elbow bump or handshake, which I'm sure is going on at a conference in the road right now. We're going to jump right in. I really want to get into a lot of conversation here. Greg, Morgan, great to have you here. So we'll start with you, Morgan, just in terms of name, rank, serial number, and we won't prep for this, but I always do like to ask it sometimes. Just what's top of mind for you today? It could be related to the industry. You read an interesting article, you saw some emerging cool tech, but yeah, talk to us who you are and what's top of mind.
Thanks, Sharon.
Yes,
Okay, thanks for the invitation. Delighted to be here. Morgan McKenney. I hopefully have a glow for everyone. I've just left my role after an amazing career at Citi for 18 years, living around the world, doing amazing jobs and working with amazing people and taking a sabbatical. So I've gotten a chance to step back. So what's on my mind are big picture things like where's the world of financial services going, and the realization that financial services disruption is accelerating as we speak.
I look forward to asking you that question as well. Greg.
Thank you. My name is Greg Bukowski. I'm with BMC Software. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I've been with BMC for 11 years, based out of Chicago. What's on top of my mind is actually my first flight. So this was awesome to be here live and in person and being able to do this event. Look forward to doing a lot more of these events. My role is a field CTO, so I help bring the message and bridge the gap between our CTO office and our customers. So thank you.
Yeah, and BMC, of course, is one of our supporting partners. And just also tell people a little bit about BMC if they don't know BMC.
Absolutely, yeah. So BMC, we focus on operational excellence. So we support infrastructure from the mainframe to the cloud and help deliver services for our customers. So we talk a lot today about some of those services around DevOps and customer experience, but really focusing on what the value is for the customers and how they can drive that value for their customers.
That's great. Well, again, thanks for being here. And what I kind of want to do is start top line a little bit like I did with Sarah in terms of just, managing and leading teams and just what you've learned through the pandemic in terms of keeping innovation moving forward, keeping just sort of operational resiliency moving forward, whatever it might be. And, Morgan, why don't we start with you about, before you went on your sabbatical and wow, I mean, you were global, you were international, and you were trying to do all this during the pandemic and remotely, but what's top of mind for you there?
Absolutely. When the pandemic hit, I was in Hong Kong, which is one of the safest places. They have a, SARS playbook that they wheeled out and really got on the hop to contain the spread. And so that was interesting to be based there as the pandemic hit. Being at a, super large financial institution that's globally distributed, top of mind in the pandemic is continuity of business. We're in 100 markets with call centers around the globe, development centers around the globe. And really it's how do you keep your service always on for your customers? That's number one. Number two, and as important, is people and safety. Citi has over 200,000 employees. Again, this was our first real global pandemic, and keeping those 200,000 safe and healthy was top of mind. And the last is economic impact, helping our customers. We're a bank, financial services for hard hit consumers, as well as obviously credit exposure management and PPP loans for small businesses. So really managing the economic impact for helping our customers as well.
That's great. Yeah, you're out in the field. So obviously you were remote as it was and connecting back with HQ, but being out there with your customers and remotely. What did you learn during the last 18 months?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. We have over 6,000 people, global company, and we were mostly remote already, right? So we had to just transition the last few over to meet that workforce, and the productivity was fantastic. I remember reading a study early in the beginning of the year that productivity was up 20%, right, across the board for financial services, for every vertical across these C-level people that they had interviewed. And then the result of that, though, is the impacts to your people themselves, right? How do they adjust to the burnout factor that's going to be coming from continually working hard, not having the collaboration aspects? And you're talking in the previous session about collaboration tools, right? And that was one of the big things that we started investing in, was how do we get better collaboration tools now that you don't even have the opportunity to meet and work in workplaces and WeWorks or wherever it is, customer sites, none of that, right? Yet we have big account teams that focus and help our customers, but they have to work together. And if they're not in person, how do you do that?
Right.
So.
I want to talk sort of top line about the autonomous digital enterprise, which BMC talks a lot about, which brings in things like automation. It brings in things, RPA, leveraging artificial intelligence to sort of automate tasks that hopefully can maybe flow down into a smoother, frictionless customer experience, right? But talk to us a little bit about, how you see the autonomous digital enterprise, and then Morgan, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about how you saw things like automation and RPA, impacting ultimately the customer experience in a positive way.
Yeah, the autonomous digital enterprise was something that BMC had worked with McKinsey. We chartered to do a study of what does enterprise of 2025 look like? And it is this autonomous digital enterprise where you're gaining insights out of the data that you have, right? Data being the new digital currency, and being able to drive your business. How do you create and find opportunities, especially in financial services, but most verticals, right? Is how do you then take advantage of that data that you have and drive the insights? And that's what we focus on from our solution standpoint. So it's big time around automation, right? And the big shift we see in organizations is driving what we see as a site reliability engineering practice within customers, right? Big thing from Google that came out in 2013, but that has been almost a de facto approach of operations. How do I now tie that line of business goals and objectives? Like you were talking about, how do I measure something for a customer? Well, that's the principle of the site reliability engineer, is what's the benefit to my customer and how do I measure that from an operational standpoint? And that's what BMC is tackling. That is our big problem because that's real business value for our customers.
Morgan, how did you see this sort of end up on the customer experience side of things while you're at Citi, and maybe even what you're thinking about in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. As we think about cloud at a high level, Citi processes $4 trillion worth of payments a day, which is the world's GDP in 20 days. And that means you need hyper resilient, always on systems. And so cloud, I think, has been, we're also a honeypot, right? We have the privilege of holding $1.3 trillion of balances on behalf of our customers. So lots of folks want to break into, so cybersecurity is a really important facet of how we manage our infrastructure, obviously. So I think cloud, a lot of the larger banks, I would say, have transitioned to cloud, and it provides that scalability and agility. But we haven't obviously adopted it in all of our instances and all of our platforms and applications. I'd say automation, to Greg's point, has very well embedded, things like reading documents. I mean, we get millions of pieces of paper for trade finance. You have to process those docs, digitize them, and then handle them. And then, if we think about RPA, we've done a lot in RPA. These are great for repeatable processes. I think we'd hoped it would be an amazing, panacea, because you don't have to transform your underlying architecture. It sits on top of it. But for that very reason, it is actually harder to maintain and control than one would hope. So, we've used it in certain instances. And then I think AI is very, very early days. I mean, that relies on an amazing data stack. Then you have the right kind of expertise to do this continuous learning and self-learning. So we're still a way to go, I would say, in AI in general across all traditional corporates.
And share with us just a little bit, we talk about data specifically and just all the different data systems that were part of Citi, because it acquired many companies over the years. And just
absolutely
tell us a little bit, were there any success stories in trying to get better data and sort of, integrate a lot of these systems and then use RPA to get better data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Citi has something like $80 billion of revenue, and it has a massive consumer business and a massive institutional business. And we've grown out of acquisitions back in the day. So data is always a challenge, but I think that's true for a lot of companies that grew and scaled by acquiring a number of different companies. Where I would say AI and ML has helped is on personalization, on next best offer, in some ways that we try to show customers that we know them. So there has been progress in personalization, I would say. And fraud, by the way.
Yeah, and fraud, right. Yeah. Well, and this gets into one of the things I did want to talk about in the session, and I called it hybrid cloud, because the cloud is all the rage, right? And AWS and Azure and all this thing, and what it's doing for their companies. But for financial services firms and probably firms in other industries where security is hugely important, right? The balances of your customers and just things like that, and all the attacks that on-prem and mainframe still has to be very important. And I'd assume it's a large percentage of where the data resides or whatever may reside on mainframe and on-prem. So can you talk a little bit about that, Greg, just also in terms of, all this hype around automation and creating efficiencies, having better customer experiences, but how much of this is now done sort of in the cloud, and how much is done on-prem via mainframes, and how much is hybrid, and how do you sort of manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And especially in the financial services sector, I deal a lot with the big banks, right? And for them, most of their business, vast majority of their business is still done on premise. We just released a mainframe survey. We interviewed 1,600 customers, and they bring back their insights around what's going on in the mainframe. 92% of them are growing workloads. And I bring that up because I think the progressive customers that approach that concept of workload can run in cloud, it can run a mainframe, private cloud. Where do I optimize that? That's best for my business to provide the best customer experience. Where I do see the banks really taking advantage of the public cloud is in the customer facing side of the world, right? I think you can get the most scalability with the solutions that you have there, but you're still running all your critical business applications probably back on the mainframe for the most part, right? And as you redevelop those, right, it can migrate to the cloud. But what I see even more interest in is in the fintech space. I mean, the big banks don't want to have to rebuild all this stuff, right? I mean, why not take advantage of the fintechs building these services as a B2B platform for these places to migrate what would be mainframe workload into now a SaaS service? I see that in insurance, especially. Like, that's been a really commoditized market that's been taken over by fintechs being able to meet those needs, and insurance companies, the large ones that we work with a lot of, reducing their mainframe footprint, start using SaaS solutions.
And Morgan, how did you sort of deal with that? And we're not going to get too deep into the IT weeds. I don't want to be there either. But just in terms of particularly like your last role as COO, where you're certainly interested in growth and great customer opportunities and experiences, but you also have an eye on the costs, right? So in terms of just dealing with that. So as sort of more of a product and customer person, talking with IT about cloud and what's mainframe and on-prem and what's public or private cloud. How did you work with them and just try to be able to drive product innovation with dealing with all that?
Yeah, I'm a girl, digital done right delights. And over my sabbatical, the done right is really important. It's not just, a lot of folks still are focusing on the glossy front end, but it's everything behind, it's middle and back that actually delights the customer. Because even in, beyond financial services, there's a lot of people behind the curtain, whether they're in a bank's instance, whether they're approving loans, right? That's not automated. Or whether they're checking other things, et cetera, or having to input data into other systems, right? So really it's about digitizing end to end, and it sounds easy, it's very hard to do, and then have the right data stack, obviously, that you can do ML and AI on top of it for these personalized experiences. So what I would say is we're focused a lot on how do you have, and I ran digital strategy from a global perspective as part of my role. How do you really make sure that everything you're doing, because so much needs to be digitized, actually has a customer impact, that your NPS score goes up? And this is really an art and a science. You have to blow by blow, 10,000 things come in the filter to fix and feedback. Ideally, I would love our customers to be giving us product development ideas, so that they are actually our product developers, because what they say we can read and then we can implement, et cetera. So, that's sort of like a wish list, if you will, of involving your customers in ongoing product development and taking it where they want it to go.
Yeah, and can you maybe give us some best practices as you manage digital strategy, looked at all these customers and all these different markets, maybe the art side of that, art and science, and maybe Greg, I'll ask you the science part of that question. How did you perfect the art? We talked with Sarah about, they have their customer experience labs and they're very, very aggressive in terms of getting customer feedback, and it gets right back in. But how did you perfect the art there at Citi?
Yeah, you're always raising the bar, right? Because your most amazing consumer experience, no matter what industry, is your new bar that you judge everybody else. So what I would say is, one, it is empathy and listening to your customers. And Jane, as our new CEO, is really focused on empathy. It means putting yourselves in your customer's shoes, understanding where the customer has been, where they are, and where they want to go. That's, again, easy to say, hard to do. Co-creation with customers on the institutional side, Citi did a lot of that, which is really, you're in with not just the user, you're in with their salespeople, biz dev people, their ops people. So you're really creating a more holistic solution. You're there with other partners that can bring. So you need sort of a collaboration PhD, I would say, and a lot of empathy. It's sort of digital with a soul.
To live richly, which a good friend of mine, Brad Jakeman, helped coin for you guys as CMO. But and that's interesting. I look forward to where Citi goes from a marketing, a branding standpoint. More back to sort of the science, but also with an eye on the art. As you talk to a lot of CTOs and more the technical side of the house, I don't know what do people maybe not think about that RPA automation and these types of things can do in terms of helping the customer experience, right? Maybe this, I never even sort of thought of that. I mean, where is the little light gone on when you're talking, even with some of the more technical people?
Yeah, I think the big challenge is around data. Like, there's so much data that's it's unstructured, right? And collecting that data, and you talk about customer sentiment, like, what a great way to do ideation is just have customers capturing things on Twitter, right? Well, they're mentioning this about these products, or something's annoying them. Maybe I can take that and productize it, right? And being able to capture that stuff and bring it back into the product house is really where I see a lot of data ops opportunities around understanding how do I take unstructured data, customer sentiment feedback in real time and bring that back into my development fold. Internally at BMC, we've got an interesting approach where we have our innovation lab, and there's a lot of customers that do innovation labs, like Google, the hyperscalers and whatnot. We have to take a different focus, right? Because we're not providing a platform of infrastructure; we provide a service, right? So we like to work with our customers to actually do co-innovation, right? So in one case, or in some cases, like we're doing IoT development, but focused on the business value to the actual end user customer, right? How do you get that measurement? Because that's going to drive value for us when we provide solutions then to other customers, other verticals. What's the business impact, and start measuring that, and not just the up down time of infrastructure.
Right. And more in regards to the labs for you, certainly I work with Jeff Smith over there in open innovation. We talk, like I said, CDX has done a lot of shows on open innovation, which is why I wanted to ask Sarah more from the operational sort of at the C-suite level. Do you have, best practices advice in terms of managing open innovation and these types of innovation programs where you have a real clear focus on the ROI? It doesn't turn into innovation theater. And what were the best practices to getting, actual ideas that come out of these labs into real world product experiences or impacting the journey?
Absolutely. I think, and probably many companies have this. Citi has a ventures unit, and they're bringing the outside in, right? They're looking at thousands of fintechs. They're seeing where things are moving in spaces that are important to Citi, as an example. And then we have innovation labs in our institutional business and innovation spaces within consumer that they're focused on adjacent and disruptive innovation, right? The business is doing a lot of core, you could say small I, right? The product improvement, and supported then by these innovation folks that are helping adjacent. And we have a way to de-risk disruptive. That's also important, right? You can't shoot for the fences and, blow a whole bunch of money. You want to de-risk it. So you're shooting for the fences, but you only blow a little bit of money to test that. Right. And then I think we focus, when I manage the lab, and it's continued to this day, innovation, IAU is the new BAU. You can't do things in a white coat in a lab. I mean, certainly you might want to have your frontier folks perhaps, but at a broad scaled company, you need to have everybody with an innovative mindset. That means testing and learning, experimenting, a culture of risk. There's a whole bunch of things, mindset that has to come. And that takes education, that takes sort of sharing certain competencies and practicing them. You have to do innovation. You can't read about it. So that's, a continuous process, I would say, of deepening the innovation mindset across the firm.
And do you have thoughts in terms of, they're mostly cost centers. Ultimately, you want to see, revenue and new products come out of them and all that. But at the end of the day, they're cost centers. Do you have thoughts in terms of who should be funding that? Should multiple business units, should multiple departments or divisions chip in on that? Like, who should, if I want to start an innovation lab, there's someone out there that says, we need to do this. Where should they go ask for the money?
The business, this is ultimately, you're doing this for the customer. What is innovation? Something new of value for customers, ultimately. It's that simple. And to do that, the business needs to care. So again, if they're sitting off in white coats and it's going to, get, the business is going to not be happy about bringing it in, or they don't think it's important to their customers, it's wasted resources. So really, I think any innovation-minded folks have to work deeply with the business, but they have maybe a depth of innovation competencies that can bring new skills to the business.
And who funds the headcount?
We fund it across the business. We funded it from across the business.
That's great. So any questions here? I think we have about 6 or 7 minutes left. So I want to get some questions. Anything virtually out there? Okay, we'll get if you can repeat it with the mic coming at you in just a second. There you
go. The question is, you referred to the huge number of transactions and business that's still conducted on a mainframe. Do you foresee a future anytime soon when that business will transition to the cloud?
Not in the immediate future. I mean, the dependencies that you have with the regulators and the critical business applications that are there, those workloads just tend to continue to work. It's too risky, right? And when we talk to the banks about that and what their thoughts are, I don't hear any CTO saying, hey, I got to get my business off the mainframe right now, because it's just there. It is what it is. To them, again, they look at it more as a workload, and they don't think about the actual infrastructure that it's working on. What it does mean is that as you think about new ways of doing business, and this is one of the big things that BMC's looked at, is how do you just work differently, right? In the new pandemic world and how we've had to assess like collaboration, some of the things that we're doing is, instead of maybe having people work better, is change the way they work, right? And provide data and insights through solutions. Like for our sales team specifically, it's like, how do we just get them to be more efficient at their jobs? How do you get your product lines to be more efficient at their jobs? And when you transform your operational model of how you do business, that'll move the workloads off the mainframe naturally. Like, I think that's going to be more the approach than, oh, I do this, I'm going to port this application to here. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, and just Morgan, just in terms of that, is it just a very simple, obvious answer of why it isn't more in the cloud? Is it security? I mean, is it just primarily that, or is there some other reason?
Reliability and security. I think both. Honest and risk. I mean, what is the definition of legacy? Well, what word comes to mind? Some people think old. No, it works. I mean, again, so I think, there's other spaces where you could use cloud's benefit as an example that don't present as much risk and still give you a lot more benefit and flexibility.
Right. Any other questions out here? And David?
Thanks, Drew. I wanted to ask Morgan a question about the relationship of fintechs to incumbents, which was a really interesting sort of theme of Matthew's opener. And you're obviously, I mean, I would assume thinking about this a lot right now as a sort of free agent. When you look at the kind of overall ecosystem of financial services, do you think that fintechs pose any kind of fundamental threat, or is essentially that all going to get just absorbed into these colossi that's still essentially dominant?
Well, a few responses, David. Thank you. So first is, I think most banks have realized they can't do everything themselves. I mean, new tech has evolved so much over the last decade. You can't be an expert in everything. So partnering with fintechs to improve your capabilities to customers is now, I'd say, a well-trodden path, maybe not as fast as fintechs want it to go, right? But Citi has a lot of wins in that category where we partner with fintechs. And that is a model that I view will continue and is important. What I would say is the sabbatical insight was disruption in financial services is accelerating. It's happened already on the consumer front, but it's going to happen in a much more deeper way with new forms of digital money, as well as new networks. Blockchain is a new network to transfer value. It still has transformative, I'd say, impact. And DeFi, makes bankers' eyeballs fall out. I mean, I spent time learning about DeFi because it's as if every service you provided, people had to line up your door, and now there's another door. And so these new techs, also a new network, are creating catalysts to improve the old, right? So it's hustling up legacy, which is good for the world. But you will need, the way the digital economy is advancing, you will need new capabilities that don't exist today in terms of the financial infrastructure. It is still too fragmented. You need greater democratization and access, more efficient and inclusive. So I do think there's a lot more road to hoe on disruption. But the chasm of regulated and non-regulated will have to get addressed because it's just unsustainable. The more important fintechs become, the more services they provide. You need customer protection. You need to make sure this is money we're talking about. So I do think the hope is regulatory environment helps encourage innovation while protecting consumers as well as ensuring appropriate capitalization, because there will be that crisis moment, the OS moment, the bumps will come and it's money, it's your money.
Yeah, and in the second half of the program, we're going to get into that as well.
Drew, I have another question from online. How do you balance the push to automation/AI with the need for human review to avoid biases and discrimination becoming automated and baked more in than they are already?
Yeah, I mean, that's the huge challenge around data today, right? And you see it all the time, especially in financial services customers, right? You're going to have a profile of a person that's probably typical of what it is. And that's not a diverse DEI kind of focus around making sure that it's equitable and, you're looking at the gamut of everyone. I do think there's an interesting opportunity when you talk about like the fintechs and the global, like when you think about the globalization aspect, and how fast fintechs can address the global needs and gaps that are in third world countries and areas and continents, like that's going to change the game. And I think it's going to help address what you just asked around the DEI. So like when you stop just looking at your clientele, your top clientele, and start looking at the global macro piece of it, I think it's going to open up a lot of eyes and opportunities.
And just to add, I want to hardwire equity into algorithms, and you can do that if you're thoughtful about unconscious bias so I think that's what, my aspiration is we address the inequities that exist today in an automated and AI world by hardwiring equity. And next-gen platforms. We've learned a lot from platforms. They've been incredibly successful. They're the world's most valuable companies, but there are a lot of negative externalities. So what is a next-gen platform? How do you ensure transparency for regulators? How do you ensure customer protection? How do you ensure some of these things you want? How do you reward the participants that are creating the value on that platform, right? More than maybe they're rewarded today. So a lot of opportunities, I'd say, to take some learnings and build on them.
That's great. We're going to have to wrap it there, 10 seconds or less, or to go back to the original title of the session, Hybrid Cloud Innovation 2022, Emerging Tech, Emerging Platforms. What excites you as it relates to the cloud and innovations that will be sort of empowered or enabled by the cloud, whether it's certain applications, be something with voice that excites you, but what excites you about, sort of hybrid cloud innovation as it relates to new emerging tech that will impact the customer experience?
I think in the immediate, artificial intelligence, but I think that's going to be a little bit down the road of quantum computers. And because people are so unique, it's hard to drive an AI model that's going to be super effective for them. So that evolution is going to spawn amazing new innovation.
And in the eye of the customer, Morgan, what's going to be exciting?
I think big picture writ large, it is digital money, new forms of money, natively born digital money.
That's great. Well, we'll end it right there. Round of applause for our panelists, and thanks everyone out there.